It is now 2020, and despite vast amounts of information now being accessible, most people are still living their lives in ignorance of their real surroundings. While the average person goes to work, raises a family and attempts to live life as peacefully as possible, they are too busy to notice that Satanists surround them. Every now and again these people are given a glance of actual reality, but the outlandish nature of the claims means that most ignore and dismiss them. In just the last few years we have seen a huge alleged cover-up in Hampstead in the UK as well as Pizzagate in the USA. Despite a full blackout by the mainstream media and strict censorship laws enforced in the USA and UK, every now and then one of these stories leak. And when they leak, we are given a small but very dark and disturbing look into the world of Satanism, child sacrifice and human trafficking. The mainstream media dismiss a connection to Satanism, government, and the ruling elite. False memories, lies, dodgy therapy and a whole host of other reasons are given to explain these so-called false accusations. And the internet is blamed for spreading the lies. According to Wikipedia, the Cleveland child abuse scandal was a 1987 wave of suspected child sexual abuse cases, many of which were later discredited, in Cleveland, England. In the years prior to the scandal, levels of reported child abuse in the Cleveland area were consistent with those of other parts of the United Kingdom. However, in 1987, during the period of February to July, many children living in Cleveland were removed from their homes by social service agencies and diagnosed as sexually abused. The 121 diagnoses were made by two pediatricians at a Middlesbrough hospital, Marietta Hicks and Jeffrey Wyatt, using the later discredited diagnostic of reflex anal dilation. When there were not enough foster homes in which to place the allegedly abused children, social services began to house the children in a ward at the local hospital. Later, the test being used to establish child abuse was contested by the area police surgeon, and cooperation between the social workers, police and hospital doctors involved in diagnosis began to disintegrate. In addition, there was public concern regarding the practices being used by the local social service agency, such as the removal of children from their homes in the middle of the night. In May 1987, parents marched from the hospital where their children were being held to the local newspaper. The resulting media coverage caused the social service agency's practices to receive public scrutiny and criticism in response. The Butler-Sloss report was commissioned by the Secretary of State for Social Services in July 1987 and published in 1988. The report was led by Elizabeth Butler-Sloss, and it concluded that most of the diagnoses were incorrect. As a result, 94 of the 121 children were returned to their homes. An editorial in The Lancet concluded, "By their bull-headed approach, Dr. Hicks and Dr. Wyatt have set back the cause they sought to promote." In July 1988, 6 MPs tabled a House of Commons motion for charges of indecent assault and conspiracy to be brought against Hicks and Wyatt. On October 14, 1991, the Children Act 1989 was implemented in full as a result of the Cleveland child abuse scandal and other child-related events that preceded it. Tuesday, February 28, 1995, The Independent reported. A 15-year-old girl who was one of the 8 Ayrshire youngsters taken into care after their parents were wrongly accused of ritual sex abuse, was reunited with her mother and father last night. The parents, who cannot be named for legal reasons, said they were delighted that their years of hell and injustice had come to an end. They described their immense relief at yesterday's ruling in the Court of Session in Edinburgh that all the Ayrshire children should return home. They bitterly criticised the social workers whose investigations in 1990 led to the initial care orders. The Strathclyde Social Work Department had failed to learn the lessons of the Cleveland child sex abuse scandal in 1987, they said. Like other parents, I handed my girl to these people for tests, the girl's father said. They said I would get her back in 2 or 3 days, and it was 5 years. 5 years in which she was crying in the dark. The Ayrshire case is the latest sex abuse scandal in which children have been returned to their families after abuse allegations have turned out to be unfounded. Following highly publicized cases in Cleveland, Orkney, and Rochdale, new guidelines have been issued to social workers investigating abuse claims. Government researchers have disputed the very existence of satanic abuse. The Ayrshire case began when the mother of one of the 8 children asked social workers to investigate claims that her husband had abused her 3 children. The allegations led to a major police investigation into a sex abuse ring involving 70 adults and children. After initial examinations, 4 boys and 4 girls, then aged from 10 months to 11 years, from 3 closely related families, were removed by social workers using place of safety orders. At an initial hearing in Ayr in August 1990, Sheriff Neil Gow QC found that the children had been sexually abused or were members of a household where a child had been abused. Sheriff Gow said there was evidence of sinister elements of sadism, ritualism, and torture. Warning that the public must be alerted to extreme depravities and appalling practices, he referred the case to a Scottish children's panel. It made the 8 youngsters the subject of supervision orders and they were taken into care. The families protested their innocence, pointing out that despite exhaustive police inquiries no one had been charged with any offense. With the help of lawyers, they began to compile new evidence which challenged Sheriff Gow's findings. Evidence from expert medical witnesses, who had experience of the Cleveland and Orkney cases, indicated that social workers who examined the children were inadequately trained, had asked leading questions, and that medical examinations were flawed. In 1997, a controversial television documentary, The Death of Childhood, claimed that independent experts under the guidance of the Department of Health later found that at least 70% of the diagnoses were correct. According to the documentary, 2 years after the scandal, a number of children were again referred to social services and determined to be at risk for child abuse. In February 2007, Sir Liam Donaldson, the chief medical officer, who was the regional medical officer at the time of the scandal, said of the original diagnoses, "The techniques that have been used have not been reliable and it does look as if some mistakes have been made." A few days later, Two of the children who had been the focus of the scandal asked the Middlesbrough police for an investigation of their 1987 experience. Lindsay Wise said, "My mother and father were accused of an unspeakable offense. It has almost destroyed their lives. My father was never strong enough to work again. My mother can never forget the trauma of nearly losing her children. Now I want answers. I want an apology. I will not be silenced." Her sister Paula said, "We were abused by the very people, the doctors and social workers there to protect children. We were put up for adoption. Now we want to know why." The television documentary, The Death of Childhood, claims the techniques that were used were still regularly used at the time of the making of the documentary and were also used by the FBI. There were allegations of Satan ritual abuse made, and many were retracted later, involving many local families, and according to doctors, many of the children in question shown signs of being sexual abused when medically examined. The media and the people involved now claim that the doctors got it wrong and that most the children were not sexual abused. The ritual abuse allegations were said to have been created by social workers and drilled into the children's heads until they believed and repeated it. The Cleveland child abuse scandal, along with a similar case in Nottingham, would begin a new wave of allegations of satanic and ritualistic abuse of children in Rochdale, Orkney and many other places. On the July 6, 2013, a woman I will not mention by name wrote Nottingham Police this request. "Dear Nottinghamshire Police, in October 1987 children were removed from their families in Nottingham, and in February 1989 a Broxtow family was charged with multi-generational child sexual abuse and neglect. A 600-page report on the incident was produced, and later a revised report was produced. Please send me copies of both reports. Please, can you state what was the outcome of the charges?" On the July 31, Nottinghamshire Police responded, "I write in connection with your request for information, which was received by Nottinghamshire Police on July 8, 2013. Following receipt of your request, searches were conducted within Nottinghamshire Police to locate the information you require. Please find below answers to your questions. Response under S1, 1A, of the Freedom of Information Act 2000, FOIA, I can confirm that Nottinghamshire Police does not hold the information you have requested. Despite not having the information requested, which is strange, but they did advise her to visit this joint inquiry report." The highlights of the report reads: In October 1987, children of an extended family in Nottinghamshire were removed from home on suspicion that they had been sexually abused by their parents and relatives. In February 1989, 10 adults, both male and female, appeared at Nottingham Crown Court charged with 53 offences of incest, indecent assault and cruelty against 21 of the children of their extended family, and extensive terms of imprisonment were imposed. It is generally agreed that this was the most serious case of multi-generational sexual abuse within an extended family known in Britain. The successful prosecution was the culmination of inquiries made by both police and social services personnel cooperating together into what became known as the Broxtow case, Nottingham. It resulted in considerable praise from the media, local councillors and even the Prime Minister for the efforts of the police and social workers after the Crown Court judge made named commendations in respect of the involved personnel. The children had been made wards of court before the criminal proceedings commenced, and the judge gave permission for the children to be interviewed by psychiatrists instructed by the parties. Any further interviews by social workers or the police would have required the court's further permission. This was a sensitive time as the furor over Cleveland had erupted 3 months previously. The children's foster parents were asked to keep diaries of anything they said or did that might be relevant to their future welfare. These diaries formed part of the evidence provided to the wardship court, which resulted in all the children being committed to the care of the local authority. The disclosures made in these diaries indicated very extensive sexual abuse. They also appeared to suggest that the children had been subjected to something more than sexual abuse, as the children talked about witch parties, the murder of babies, the killing of animals, the involvement of strangers, and of being taken elsewhere to be abused. Nothing like the content of these diaries had ever been seen before, and they eventually gave rise to the suspicion that the children might have been involved in some form of organized ritualistic, satanic abuse or witchcraft cult. Adult members of the extended family were interviewed by social workers and appeared to support this view. The police set up a separate unilateral investigation into these further revelations after a senior social worker made a statement. The social workers were not invited or encouraged to take part in this investigation, which was called Gollum. The social workers have stated that they had little idea as to what, if anything, was actually being investigated. When the police reported in their findings that they did not consider satanic abuse or witchcraft was involved, or that there were any other perpetrators, this was not accepted by social services staff. It would appear that the social work staff had formed a view that the police had deliberately set out to discredit the corroborating adults. In their view, the police were trying to disprove and close down the investigation. They further considered that the police did not have sufficient knowledge of this type of abuse and were not prepared to acquire it. In short, the Social Services Department, having not been involved, were not satisfied that the police had undertaken a thorough investigation, and additional information the social workers acquired about tunnels at Walton Hall and a swimming pool at an identified house appeared to strengthen this opinion. The police were concerned that the information contained in the children's diaries would be on their prosecution files and, therefore, available to the defense in the criminal prosecution. They considered that there was a possibility that as potential witnesses the children and young adults would be discredited. Because of this, the police requested that no further diaries should be kept, but this ran counter to the requirements of the wardship hearing and the need to understand the children's experience if they were to be helped. By June 1988, the police refused to accept any more of the children's diaries. They indicated that they would no longer be prepared to investigate disclosures of this nature. The only exception to this was an interview conducted with children who alleged that murders had taken place on a boat. Once again, the social workers considered that the police had set out to discredit the children. Disclosures identifying locations and additional perpetrators. It is indisputable that a profound mistrust had developed, and the awareness of this was not helped by the knowledge that the Cook program would be including Nottingham in its presentation of a program on the satanic abuse of children. In April 1989, a joint memorandum outlining the social services perspective of the disclosures and inquiry work was submitted by the Principal Solicitor and Assistant Director of Children's Services to the Chief Executive. The memorandum did not express a view as to whether satanic abuse was a reality, but it did express grave concern that further children could be at risk and that it was no longer possible to investigate this. The memorandum made the point that if a child was abused as a consequence of the lack of investigation, then it would be very damaging for the local authority. The memorandum was, therefore, written to draw attention to this and compel further action. The children were not interviewed formally by social workers, but the foster parents kept diaries recording anything unusual that the children said or did. The children in the Brockstow case said and talked about the following: babies being killed by being jumped upon and then left in the garages. Babies being shot and put in the garages. Babies being taken from next door and from across the road and having their heads bashed on the floor. Babies being thrown on the bonfire. A naughty policeman killing babies. The family having dead babies hung around their necks. Babies being killed and buried in the front garden. A monster getting our babies. Digging up babies in a field. Babies being stabbed in a balloon and cooked in the oven. Killing people at witch parties. A lady and little girl being shot, chopped up and put in the river in a bin, or variant buried by the river. A hymen, living in a big castle full of sharks and boats, eating children. Jesus being chopped up and eaten off a silver pad. All their family eating a man killed in a boat, cutting him up and putting him in a bag after going to a fantastic castle in a boat with Mr. Poo Pants and the local vicar. A child being cut with a knife and being made to drink the blood put in a cup. Killing children with a knife in the stomach. One of the children's tummies being cut open by her father in the living room and then taken to hospital. The children themselves being killed and magicked better. The witches killing a baby taken out of a female member of the family's tummy and then making it better. All of the children being killed at parties. I'm Superman at the parties and I kill all the witches. We sit in a circle with the neighbor's kids, 10 of them. They stick a knife into the sheep, the witches laugh and put the blood into a jug and then uncle shoots it. Auntie brings the sheep in a cage, they stab them and put the blood in a jug. The family chopped the sheep's head off, wanted the blood to drink. A church where the murderers hang you. Being sexually abused in an underground room at the church, all the family and neighbors dressing up there as witches, clowns and ghosts. Witch parties in pubs and churches, going to hospital dressed up as witches and ghosts, clowns and monsters to abuse the babies there. The doctors and nurses watched. Doctors and nurses dressed as witches attending witch parties. Big house with little house nearby with circular raised swimming pool, secret room, 4-poster bed and grandfather clock where you are sexually abused. A red drink that makes you sleepy, a table with a purple plastic cloth with snakes, moons, stars, pigs, spiders, and donkeys on it. A member of the family putting on a cloak and flying, the children being turned into frogs by the witches. The context of the disclosures. The first fact that strikes you is that until Mr. W briefed the foster parents with the satanic indicators, all 4 children were talking entirely about their family, of which 7 are ESN. Being involved in sex and what they call witch parties. There are only vague references to strangers. The second, even more pertinent fact, is that until Mr. W's presentation of the satanic indicators, all the children are talking about sexual abuse and the witches' parties at their homes. It is not until the May 3rd, 88 that they start to talk about a big house with a swimming pool, and even then, only with reference to sexual abuse and nothing satanic. They only start to identify other locations of witch parties in July 1988 when the foster parents had been asked to take the children around to identify locations. The children all lived in typical semi-detached council houses on council estates. As we all know, the walls of these houses are paper thin, the rooms are very small with the average living room being 14 by 12, and they have open gardens. In our experience, it is virtually impossible on council estates to keep anything secret that can be seen or heard. The neighbor states that she had seen young children naked in the garden eating their own excrement and running around the garden naked or with very little on, even on freezing cold days. She adds that any talk of witchcraft or any type of satanic practices regarding the family surprises me a great deal. I have never had or witnessed anything like that on this estate before. The neighbors do maintain that the family used to frequently return from the pub and continued parties with a lot of shouting and swearing. Despite this, the social workers have accepted that abortions were committed in the front room, that later one of the children had her stomach cut open on a table in the front room, and that Mary witnessed 7 children being killed along with acts of cannibalism. We do not consider that the belief that this could be kept secret matches basic common sense or reality. Outside of the babies and the children, sheep are large, noisy, difficult animals, and when one was slaughtered by an Indian on a council estate in Leicester, it hit the national newspaper headlines the following day. In our view, another explanation has to be sought. The diaries of individual children. Craig was only 3 years of age when he left home in December 1986 and was only 4 years of age when he was trying to recall events that could only have happened between July and December 1986, i.e. between 2½ and 3 years of age. Craig is particularly significant because he had been in care for a year before the other children, and some major themes start with him. Witches, killing sheep, babies being killed, Selena, blood in the bath, Mr. Brown. He mentions Daddy dressing up as a witch, but according to his foster parent he went to his school panto on the December 9th where an older girl was dressed as a witch, and subsequently, had never stopped talking about the family being witches who hurt him. It is clear that anybody who has hurt or frightened Craig is a witch, monster, or clown. His description of witches, who are all members of his family, is the traditional one of a young child. They fly on broomsticks, have black teeth, long sharp fingernails, long black hair, dance around singing witchy, 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 except that they also sexually abuse him. Bite his bum and poo on the carpet. In with this he mixes Dracula, soldiers, swords, and dragons, and shooting with guns. Craig is the first to introduce the idea of babies and children being killed, but as you would expect of a child of this age, he has no real concept of killing or death, and quite happily and unchallenged talks about killing a baby and then it was alright, killing a relative, who is of course still alive, killing all the children at the parties, and himself killing the witches. James being killed and Rebecca being killed and made better. Craig also complains that his social worker has murdered him because she shouted at him. Likewise, Craig introduces the concept of sheep being killed with bare hands, sticks and knives, but also being taken to hospital to be made better. He clearly refers to his father being Big Mister, but this is later translated into the master who organizes the satanic rites. After he had witnessed his foster mother giving a blood sample at hospital and on the same day watches Jaws, which contains sufficient blood and water for anybody, he accuses the foster mother of having a bath full of blood, a theme that he pursues for some months. It is clear that Craig has a fascination and strong identification with Superman, and in March talks about Superman's girlfriend being Lena, actually Lois Lane or Miss Lane. His speech is never clear, and on questioning he answers S Lena, which becomes Selena because of the significance in the literature of a Selena as a satanic figure. Likewise he mentions a little puppet but corrects himself. This was translated by social workers into poppet, as these are the dolls that witches are supposed to stick pins in, although they are actually moppets. In March Craig is talking about the black staff at his nursery, an Indian lady, and in May he begins to talk about Mrs. Brown. In May he is the first child to identify locations away from the family home: a church where the murderers hang you and the house with the swimming pool. Charles, he was only 21 months old when he left home to be placed in the same foster home as his brother. Not surprisingly, he says very little except that on the July 7, 1988 he claims that his daddy took a baby up in a balloon and stabbed it and then cooked it. His foster mother records that on the August 31, 1988, after his social worker left, he had talked non-stop about ghosts and snakes. His only other comment was in June 1988 when he passed the church at the back of Walton Park, previously identified by the other children, and stated that it was the Devil's Church. James was the oldest child at 7 years 4 months when he left home, but is ESN. As with Craig's diary, November, December 1987 and January, February 1988, he talks exclusively about his family being monsters, witches, and clowns who hit and burn him at their homes. He has the same concept of witches as Craig and claims that they have curly black hair and broomsticks. He tends to agree with Rebecca or is prompted by leading questions, e.g. shown Book of Animals, asked about sheep at witch parties, asked about strange men at witch parties, asked about house with swimming pool, asked about Tony, asked about Mr. Brown, asked about going to a farm and the boat. Interestingly, he tells his foster mother that Rebecca was wrong about the babies. Of similar age to his sister and in the same foster home with her, his disclosing cannot be separated from Rebecca's, as it is clear that the foster mother discusses things with them together. James claimed that Mary was present at the witch parties, which she now denies. Rebecca, as with James, starts to talk about the family having witch parties at home in July 1988, 2 months after Craig. However, it is Rebecca on the March 5, 1988 who first tells about being taken in a car with a driver who is a stranger to a house where they are sexually abused in a secret bedroom and videoed. She is supported by James on the March 17, 1988 who talks about 2 large houses with swimming pools and the children being transported by taxi. Lily confirms this and adds that they go in the car with Uncle Brown. These diaries March-May 1988, in which they talk about an unknown place and strangers, are interesting in that only sexual abuse is described without any mention of witchcraft parties. Slaughter of animals, babies, etc. It is the only part of the diaries that has received any sort of corroboration, to the extent that one of the prisoners, when interviewed in prison, claimed that his wife had a friend called Mr. Brown, who went off with her and the children, and that she had another friend called Roy who was a taxi driver. There must be a suspicion that the children might have been taken elsewhere to be abused by pedophiles, although reference should be made to the section influences on the children. Unfortunately, this information was never extracted together, and the children were never interviewed by social workers or police to ascertain whether they could tell a coherent story of what, when, who, where, how, etc. If they were abused in this way with the involvement of strangers, it could have happened only 6 months previously. Rebecca's diaries for April and May 1988 are missing, and we next find her talking about other locations where witch parties took place in August 1988 after questioning by her foster mother. At this stage she claims that her father cut her stomach open in the living room and that the doctors and nurses at the hospital were witches who came to the witch parties at the Archway, Woolverton Park. At this point it is worth commenting on the cutting up and stabbing of children in a council house living room. We know that Rebecca had previously been to hospital and had an operation scar on her stomach identified as his by the surgeon. Subsequently, in the desire to believe Rebecca, it was suggested that Satanists were clever people and that they had cut her along the same scar so it could not be noticed. We know that this is medically impossible. All surgeons can recognize their own operations, and scar tissue does not heal, or if it does would be puckered and very distorted. If you had watched too many westerns in which bullets are cut out shoulders, you might believe that operations could be conducted successfully in a dirty council sitting room. However, in reality it is doubtful whether a GP could do this without serious medical consequences, and even a skilled surgeon with sterilized instruments and trained nurse would have difficulty in a non-sterile room, never mind in the middle of a witch party. Likewise, in believing the children, there appears to be little conception of the consequences of stabbing and mutilating animals or children. We have been told that plastic sheeting would be put on the floor, assuming that all the furniture had been taken out, but blood under pressure, as any policeman knows, would splatter the walls and ceiling extensively, and the smell of mutilated babies in wheelie bins or garages would be overpowering. In our view, there is no way that this sort of practice could take place in a semi-detached council house undetected. Initially, Rebecca talked about dolls, not real babies. Rebecca claimed that Mary was present at the witch parties, which is now denied by Mary Kelly. Her diaries are missing, but in any case, as the youngest of the B children, she would tend to agree with her brother and sister. Lily was aged 5 years when she left home with Maggie and joined her older sister Anna, who had been in care for 8 years. In the diaries for November, December 1987 and January, she is consistent with Craig, Rebecca, and James in identifying home and the family. Except that she talks about parties but not specifically witches. The main content during this period is of the family at home burning her with sticks. After Mr. W.'s presentation on the February 9, 1988, she talks on the February 19, 1988 about the murder of babies and the bath being full of blood. In March to May 1988, she agrees with James and Rebecca's story about the house with the swimming pool, but after that says nothing significant until months later when she talks about the fantastic castle murders on a boat, Mr. Poo Pants and a local vicar's involvement. On the August 5, 89, after watching a Blue Peter program on the caves under Nottingham, she identifies this as a place where there were monsters. Maggie, the same age as Rebecca and, therefore, the second oldest child. Maggie, despite being in the same household as Lily, says nothing except in reply to direct questioning. Yes, in support of Lily talking about the big house, until 10 months later when she claims that all the family killed and ate a man on a boat and Mr. Poo Pants burned the body. Otherwise she never talks about witch parties, killing of animals, babies, etc. Anna, aged 11 years at the time of the disclosures. Anna had been in care since 1980 when she was 2.5. The only disclosures she made are in January 1988, having been prompted by her sister's talk. She then talks about witches, a baby doll with a willy being used, being buried in the garden, eating spiders, etc. We know from the records that at the time Anna's favorite library books were witch stories. Anna talks about either her uncle or grandfather being dressed as a devil and being called master. This has been taken as significant, but we do not accept that any child younger than 3 would remember the name used by anybody 8 years ago. Children may recall traumatic events but have little memory of verbal communication, as it has little significance to them at that age. David, although slightly older than Craig when he left home, David says nothing of significance. Claire left home at 20 months, the same age as Kevin, but says nothing. Alice left home at 2.5 years, the age at which Craig remembers so much but says nothing. The need to interpret: we have been told that we must suspend disbelief and that children should be believed. By the first statement that needs to be made is that the diaries cannot be taken literally but have to be interpreted. If we do not accept this, we would have to accept the following as literal true statements. The family kill a big sheep with their fingernails and take it to the hospital to get better and bring it back. My mum flies on a broomstick. They throw lots of babies in the bins. I was murdered when I was a baby and shoved in the bin. They kill all of us at the parties. I'm Superman at the parties and I kill the witches. In fact, most of the children disclosing would actually be dead. It is clear to us that anybody looking at these diaries must interpret, and it is insufficient to say that they were telling the truth or we believe the children. Furthermore, we do not consider that suspending disbelief should also mean a suspension of common sense or the use of critical faculties. We have looked at these diaries within their context, without being selective, with an awareness of possible influences upon the foster parents and the children, and with knowledge of basic child psychology. Patterns suggesting contamination. It has been claimed that there were many children talking independently and that this was strong corroborative proof. However, a foster parent told us that she took Lily, Maggie, and David to visit Craig on the day after they came into care, and again 2 days later, and that there was continued contact between the children. A careful reading of the diaries would suggest some sort of communication between them or their 3 foster parents. We would offer the following as examples. Craig tells his foster mother of killing sheep, at which parties they both agreed they had sheep. February 9, 1988, after Mr. W's briefing, foster mother asks James about sheep, at which parties. February 25, 1988, foster mother asks Lily about animals, at which parties. Blood in bath. February 26, 1988, Lily tells foster mother about bath full of blood. February 27, 1988, Craig claims bath full of blood to his foster mother. March 17, 1988, James tells his foster mother that sheep's blood is put in the bath. Killing babies. March 21, 1988. Craig tells his foster mother about killing babies. February 10, 1988. Lily tells mother about killing babies. February 11, 1988. Craig tells foster mother about killing babies. February 21, 1988. Rebecca tells foster mother about killing babies. Mr. Brown. May 10, 1988. Craig tells foster mother about Mr. Brown. March 1, 1987. Craig tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants again. April 13, 1987. Lily tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants. May 1, 1987. Craig tells foster mother again about Mr. Poo Pants. May 2, 1987. Maggie tells foster mother about Mr. Poo Pants. Big house with swimming pool. March 9, 1089. Rebecca tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. March 10, 1989. Lily tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. March 14, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about the big house with the swimming pool. Selena. March 3, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about Selena. March 21, 1989. Craig tells foster mother about Selena again. April 8, 1989. Lily tells foster mother about Selena. May 6, 1989. Craig repeats it to foster mother. May 12, 1989. Lily repeats it to foster mother. As with the Cleveland case, this case was now beginning to be picked apart. The report continued. The NSPCC unit used symbolic objects in helping children to understand good and bad concepts in their therapy work. According to one of the staff, these were used with Claire and Anna, and the social workers were advised of their use. Craig had 6 therapy sessions between January and August 1987, well prior to the disclosures. A teacher at a local school used the material in one of the satellite cases. The material used includes the following: witches' costumes, monsters placed in a circle in sand, flowing gowns, snakes, spiders, small unclothed baby dolls buried in the sand, toy syringes for extracting blood, a toy medical kit, masks, Mr. Pooh Bear. Conclusion: our interpretation of the diaries based on the foregoing does not support the view that the children have been involved in organized satanic ritual or witchcraft ceremonies. All our research both in this country and abroad has revealed that no actual physical empirical evidence has been found anywhere at any time for satanic abuse. If you still wish to believe that it exists logically, you would have to accept that an organization has the unique ability to keep it secret. even relatively cis, made to drink alcohol, locked in the garages. If this was the case, children of this age trying to make sense of the past would talk of the family being witches, monsters, etc. We know from talking to the adults that one dog was run over in the road and that another dog and its puppies were killed with a knife to save vets' bills because they had a disease. We also know from the adult prisoners that at parties after the pub the children were given homemade alcohol to drink, which would eventually put them to sleep. It is possible that the children were taken elsewhere to be sexually abused for money, as this part of the disclosures stands out on its own, but even here we must be careful, as Craig identifies Brown after seeing a brown lady at nursery, and the children's description of a secret room, four-poster bed, raised pool, and grandfather clock all feature in a TV program shown in the same year. It is true, however, the baby was thrown out with the satanic bath water, as it was never properly investigated by seeking the judge's permission to interview the children with the police. In summary, we came to the conclusion that the diaries had been used selectively, had been taken too literally, although in fact they must be interpreted. That insufficient consideration has been given to the implications of the fact that most of the disclosures of witch parties, the killing of babies and the slaughtering of sheep, are supposed to have taken place in the living room or garden of a semi-detached council house on a council estate, and that it is predominantly the family that is mentioned as being the perpetrator. That insufficient consideration has been given to the psychology of disturbed children as young as 3 years of age. That too much emphasis has been placed on the number of children disclosing independently, when in reality it is 4 children in 3 foster homes, with 2 of the children being brother and sister living together and 2 of the foster parents being sisters. In our view, there is evidence of the children influencing each other. That insufficient consideration has been given to the influence upon the foster parents, and in particularly their briefing with the American Satanic indicators. That insufficient consideration has been given to other influences upon the children. For example, Anna and Claire were involved in therapeutic sessions at the NSPCC unit. Witches' costumes, toy monsters, masks, unclothed dolls, a toy medical kit, rubber snakes, and plastic spiders were all used. We therefore concluded that although the children may have been terrorized by their sadistic family as well as being sexually abused, we could not support the theory of organized satanic abuse from these diaries. Stage 5: the disclosures of Mary and the other children in the satellite cases. At the start of the inquiry, we were made aware that Mary, a 17-year-old member of the Brockstow family, was intimating that young children had been murdered. After this, Mary was subjected to 3 months of therapeutic work by her social workers, at the end of which the team was presented with a 35-page transcript of disclosures that she had witnessed and been involved in at least 7 child murders and acts of cannibalism at her parents' home during access visits. The transcript was presented to us as the basis for a full police investigation. We were very concerned by this disclosure material as it was clearly full of leading and limited choice questioning. It was apparent to us that the social workers must have been interviewing Mary on the basis that they believed Craig, James and Rebecca when they claimed that she had been present at witch parties. The social workers told Mary that we need to know everything, and all her inconsistent replies are treated as reality. We consider it essential to provide a lengthy extract from this transcript as the work with Mary is important to some of the conclusions in this report. As far as we are aware, the social workers still consider that their work was satisfactory, as the area director wrote to us after our views were made known to him that the work was well planned and based on sound theory, and that my workers were most unhappy at the way in which Mary was interviewed by the police. The following gives a flavor of the type of questions asked and some of Mary's answers, which are in brackets. Your father's killed a baby more than once. We know that your father delivered a fetus and aborted it. He drank the baby's blood. I didn't know anything about that. You tell us about things that happen when you were there. I ate the stomach. My dad ate the head. What part of the head? What's special about the stomach? Did anybody say why you should eat the baby? Dad brought the baby and the wheelie bin. What then? When you ate the stomach, were you told it was good for you? Did you say any words, prayers, chants? That's one occasion when you had to eat part of a baby. I'd like you to tell us about parties where that happened. Other parties where babies are killed. You had to eat babies more than once. I can't remember. We think you did. Whose baby? Who brought it? A name. Difficult to remember. Who asked you to kill the baby? I didn't kill it. Who told you to? Did she give you a knife? No, I think she did. I think you had to do it. You were scared something might happen to you. Did the social worker stay? You were asked to kill the baby. You had to do it? How was it killed? Last time we met you talked about an 11-year-old boy being killed. I heard it on the news. He was murdered and thrown in the Trent. I don't know who by. Let's have older children you've seen murdered. At a house someone murdered a kid. That's all I remember. How old? Who was there? Who ate it? Did they have to drink the blood? We think you were made to. Did many people get buried in Mum's back garden? That's not right. You said babies were buried somewhere else. Who was buried in the front garden? Mum put the knife in and made you do it? You did it, that's why you're frightened. You quite liked drinking blood and that made you guilty. She made you eat him. Does Mum wear special clothes? Tell us about the adults that have been killed and the church. Did you sexually abuse the little boy before you were made to kill it? Did someone give birth to that baby at the big house? When you got there, was the lady aborting the baby? What did it taste like? What parts did you eat? What other reasons did people in your family kill babies for? At the church drinking blood, who told dad to kill? M. Don't know, I think you did. Does he murder on any special days or times? Craig talked to me about granddad drinking blood. What would Craig say he drinks blood for? Craig says Mary was there. M. To please the devil, that's what Craig was told. Is that what Mary was told? You were told the devil would be pleased. Craig was told it would do special things for him. Things your family did for the devil. Things happened to James, Rebecca, special things. I don't know if special things happened to you, you haven't told us yet. Your family did this because they believe in the devil. Who else had the same belief outside the family? Names. Outside the family, M. Robin. The whole church. Some people in this are important people. You killed at least one baby, more than one. 3, 30. How many? If you didn't feel guilty, you might go on killing. It seems to us that the whole purpose of the therapy is to prove that Mary was involved in Satanism and to find out who further she would implicate. The questioning moves from establishing that she has killed and eaten babies and likes drinking human blood to questions about the adults involved and at church, whether special days were used, whether special clothes were worn, whether prayers, words, or chants were used. It appears to be finally established to the social workers' satisfaction that all this has happened because Mary's family are involved in devil worship. The work appears to have all the elements of an interrogation, leading and limited choice questions, e.g. you killed at least one baby, more than one. 3, 30. How many? Statements make her believe that she had already admitted something. The sudden demand for a name and the church names to catch her off guard are also employed. The questioner appears to have no doubt that the person being questioned is involved, and the task is to make them confess by any means available. It is reminiscent of McFarlane's attitude in the McMartin trial when she calls for unconventional interviewing methods that do whatever it takes to get children to talk. However, to believe Mary, the social workers have to accept that 7 murders and acts of cannibalism had taken place in the front room of a semi-detached house on a council estate to coincide with access visits without anybody noticing, and that a social worker must have been implicated. Faced with this material, which appeared to throw new light on what may have happened in the USA, Canada and Holland, we sought the help of Professors John and Elizabeth Newson of the Child Development Research Unit at Nottingham University and Professor Nicole of the Department of Child Psychiatry at Leicester University. Professor Newson advised us that Mary should be interviewed by the police in the presence of her social worker on video, and he further advised that the first session should encourage Mary to say anything that she wanted to without any questioning, and that this videotape should be compared with the original transcript before a second interview was conducted, at which probing questions could be asked. This advice was followed completely. During the course of the second interview, Mary explained that the only knowledge that she had was obtained from the social workers who had told her Craig's story. She said that she had been pressurized and that the social workers would not take no for an answer. She thought that her nephew Craig would get into trouble if she did not back him up. Everything that she had disclosed to the social workers was totally untrue, and she had only been to one birthday party at her parents' house since she came into care. We have since been concerned to learn that the social workers were most unhappy at the way in which Mary was interviewed by the police, with the implication that they still believe that she was originally telling the truth. In our view, it was an excellent police interview which we would recommend anybody to watch. After reading the transcript and studying all the videos with regard to Mary, Professors John and Elizabeth Newson have since written to us with the following comments from John Newson. I suggest that this case should be carefully documented and presented by the team because it is perhaps an important example of how the truth might be subverted and the whole factual situation confused if the guidelines and principles set out above are ignored. Special facts leading to his conclusion seem to be overall confounding of investigative and therapeutic aims by social workers, confusion over what does and what does not constitute evidence, social workers, asking leading questions, social workers, attributing actual behavior both to Mary and to her mother before this behavior has been in any way established by evidence other than Mary's inconsistent testimony. This behavior is stated as a clear fact. One may cite numerous occasions where the social workers did assert as bald fact their belief that Mary had witnessed and participated in child murder and in the eating of human flesh. There are many inconsistencies in the stories told by Mary at different points in these transcripts. The social work interviewers also imply to Mary that the facts were not in dispute but that it was her memory of them that was faulty. This is a procedure which in other contexts might well be described as brainwashing. In fact, Mary frequently describes herself as confused. Between them, the interview records suggest to me that Mary has been led into confabulating a story which she herself now half believes on the basis of statements made to her by social workers during disclosure interviews. If this assessment is correct, the disclosure procedure she has been put through may well have persuaded this disturbed and confused young woman that she herself is a child murderer, has drunk human blood and has eaten human flesh in collusion with her mother. And she has been left with the conviction that these misdeeds were partly at the instigation of a personified devil who she may believe might well try to induce her to perform similar bestial acts in the future. There may indeed be organized groups of individuals practicing ritual abuse in this community, but none of the material I have seen or heard would count as convincing evidence as it stands. In my view, also the accounts of adults, Mandy and Vivian, being offered are simply not consistent with the detailed accounts they could have given had they actually been present at genuine witchcraft ceremonies. I am particularly concerned that in the course of their disclosure interviews the social workers involved appear to have offered the children a whole vocabulary for describing their experiences, which serves to transform their accounts into apparently plausible description of witchcraft practices. Professors John and Elizabeth Newson would wish to emphasize that the comments in their report were based upon the evidence submitted to them, i.e. upon the one or two very specific interviews with particular clients, and that there may be other evidence which deserved to be taken into account to which they did not have access. They were not commenting on the competence of social workers generally. Professor Nicole, after reading the transcript and viewing Mary's 4 videotapes, comments as follows. I believe that for proper management it is essential that the facts of the abuse should be established as far as possible. Although this may be difficult, normal rules of evidence must be observed. I note that the videotape interviews that I have been asked to view follow the weekend sessions in which ritualistic abuse was discussed. It is not clear whether these weekend sessions were for the purposes of disclosure, therapy, or both. The transcript process record reveals that simple principles of neutral questioning have not been followed. This is a grossly leading line of questioning and is followed throughout the interviews. I would want to place these elaborate allegations in the context of her general adjustment. Is there other evidence of fantasizing, not uncommon, or attention-needing behavior? Most important, is there collateral evidence for these far-reaching allegations? What we can say is that the interviewing technique used in the original disclosure involved the extensive use of leading questions and was experienced by Mary as pressurizing, according to comments made in the third tape. Unless there has been a lot of assessment work that I am unaware of, I believe that attention in this case has been inappropriately focused on obtaining a disclosure of Satanism practices. I can see no evidence from these interviews that such practices took place. Mary was not the only new case referred to the team during the 5 months of its existence. In total, a further 11 children were brought to our attention who appeared to be describing ritualistic/satanic abuse. Professor Newson's advice was followed and all but 2 were interviewed and videoed by police at Epperstone. Amy, aged 14. Alleged satanic ritualistic abuse involving named people and 13 children. She claimed that she had been taken to a black house where a ceremony took place involving 100 people. She withdrew all her allegations, stating that she wished to remain in care and had made up all the stories. Lily, aged 9. Alleged babies being cooked in a microwave oven, witchcraft parties, and satanic parties held at Walton Hall. The disclosures were obtained by her foster mother, who tape-recorded the conversation. Lily started the police interviews by repeating her allegations, but when questioned regarding facts could give no coherent answers. Eventually she fully retracted her allegations and went on to explain that she wanted to please her foster mother during the interviews conducted by her. The foster mother had questioned her between recordings. Neil, aged 8. Also in care and placed with one of the Brockstow children's former foster parents, alleged that he had been to scary parties at a lady's house. That the woman had killed a baby and placed it in a microwave. He went on to speak of frightening parties in graveyards at which adults wore vampire suits and that the children were locked in caves. At his police interview he did not retract his story but went on to say that babies were cooked for 6 hours and came out black, previously raw. He was not aware that the baby would have exploded. He went on to say that spiders talked. He could not identify any of the places he had mentioned when taken to see them. Coincidentally, he made this disclosure within a week of social work staff attending the reading conference on child abuse and learning there from Jerry Simandl, who produced the second set of Satanic. Indicators used by social services, that children in the USA had reported babies being cooked in microwave ovens. Rebecca, aged 7. In care, sharing a foster home with Neil, alleged being at parties held in cemeteries and of babies being killed or placed in microwaves. At the police interview his allegations became more bizarre. He claimed that 2 of his best friends had been murdered and that 5 babies had been microwaved and that he was nearly forced to eat part of the body. He then stated that they microwaved the adults to see how they like it and put them in the skip. He went on to talk of pirates digging for gold at Walton Park and that he had been in the tunnels with Neil and there was a monster every mile. He talked of cavemen living underwater. Clara, aged 6. In care and with one of the Brockstow children's former foster parents, Craig. Alleged a witch party in a wood. She could not expand on this, but the site where the witches' parties took place does not exist. We do not know when the social workers acquired their current theories of satanic abuse or when they started using their techniques of disclosure therapy. All we have been able to learn from Craig's records is that he was involved in 8 play therapy sessions at his area office between March and August 1987 when he would have been 3.5. But we do not know the content of these. We asked for the audio and videotapes used in these sessions, for information from the social workers upon the therapeutic approach adopted, the models for disclosure work and information on the play therapy approach adopted by them. The area director, however, wrote to us. As you will recall, when the joint investigation team was set up, there was a great deal of sensitivity regarding their role, and I was assured by yourself and the director that the workers were not being investigated, rather that the evidence information was being reviewed. If that is the case, then I cannot see why information regarding the model style of the workers needs to be looked at, and as such I have instructed the senior social worker not to hand over that information. Likewise, the NSPCC unit refused to let us have the videotapes and records of the work done there with Anna and Claire. In view of this, although we have never doubted that the children were sexually abused, we cannot come to any informed conclusion as to whether any earlier therapy work with the Brockstow children has influenced their subsequent disclosures, and we have not had the opportunity to check with the social workers our judgments on their work with the children or Jane. Shortly before the end of the inquiry, we considered that we were grappling with some uncomfortable information. It was apparent from Mary's disclosures that they were based upon social work interviews with Craig, which presumably must have taken place before he became a ward of court. Craig had been received into care in December 1986, while his cousins had been removed on place of safety orders in October 1987. We understood that the decision to remove them was based in part at least upon disclosures made by Craig. Jane's second statement, "NB, she is an adult," to the police in August 1988 if it is true appeared to grow in significance when seen in the light of the work done with Mary after March 1989. It seemed to us to suggest a similar approach by the same team of social workers at a much earlier date. The following are extracts from Jane S. statement. When the case was in full swing, my social worker started interviewing me and asking me questions about parties involving witches. The first time I told her that the only parties of any kind I had been to were at the family home, I told her I didn't know anything about any other houses. She started asking me over and over again whether I'd been to any other big houses where witch parties had taken place. I kept saying I hadn't, but in the end I just got fed up with being asked, so I just said yes. She asked me to describe the houses. I told her I couldn't, so she said she'd take me round to see them in the car. She pointed to the house and asked me if that was the house. I said yes. She asked me what had happened while I was there. I told her there were video cameras there and children being abused. I made it all up. I had never been to that house before in my life. I made up a description of the inside of the house. She took me to another house near Wallatton Park. She asked me whether this was another house I'd been to. I just said yes. I agreed with whatever she said. I have been interviewed about 20 times by my social worker about these houses, but all I do is just keep saying yes. I have seen Mandy many times over the past few months, and she's told me she's been telling the social services about witch parties. I know she's telling lies. Mandy S. told me that if I tell the social services about witch parties at big houses, I might have a chance of getting my daughter back. My social workers told me if I tell the truth I could get my daughter back. Everything I have told the social worker is lies. I've told her the truth more than once, but she wouldn't believe me, so I just said anything. The only things I know about witchcraft and magic are the things I've seen on the telly. I was in court when my statements were read out in the care proceedings. Some of this was the things I had told the social worker. I was frightened to say that it wasn't true. Research into other cases in the UK. At this stage of the inquiry, we also made inquiries elsewhere in the country. Most of the police forces and the NSPCC had no information, but we obtained an interesting response from Congleton and Humberside. We have met with the Chief Inspector from Humberside, who has told us that after a national evangelical proponent of satanic abuse spent many hours with two 11-year-old boys at her home, they eventually alleged satanic abuse. A well-respected schoolmaster was arrested, but intensive police investigations found that none of these allegations against the schoolmaster were based on reality. As a consequence of the discrediting of the witnesses due to the improper intervention of this person, the prosecution had to drop serious charges of rape and buggery against 2 men. The Attorney General became involved. The police were convinced that they had a good case against these men, but were left with only the one defendant who pleaded guilty. In the information presented to us at the start of the inquiry, we were informed that in Congleton 2 separate groups of children who had not had contact with each other talked about babies being killed. They had also talked about people dressed as clowns, people dressed up as animals, lions, and tigers, and animals being sacrificed. We contacted the investigating police, who informed us that the case revolved around 3 families who were all neighbors. The children concerned belonged to 2 of the families. The evidence which could be substantiated revolved around sexual abuse only. Whilst the children aged 5, 6, 10, and 12 years were in care, they made allegations of attending parties and the murder of a baby named Daniel, whose body was buried in a back garden. The back garden was excavated and thermal image intensifiers were used. No evidence of a body was found. The allegation was then altered and the body was said to be buried on waste ground. This was also checked and no body was found. The children had made the disclosures during therapeutic work and were believed by the social workers. We were also told that one of the national figures arousing public consciousness of ritual child abuse had visited Congleton, but we do not know whether this was before or after the children's disclosures. Like the Cleveland abuse claims, the claims of satanic ritual abuse in Nottingham were also dismissed as fantasy. Social workers were blamed in both cases for the accusations of Satanism and rituals.